When taking the wedding vows, I found that my boyfriend, a drug enforcement policeman who had passed away 2 years ago, was sitting in the corner, silently looking at me. Before my rationality could react, tears had already flowed out. My whole body was shaking. The master of ceremonies said with a smile, "It seems that our bride is so touched. Marrying the one you love." All relatives and friends must have applauded. He lowered his head and smiled, poured wine, raised his glass from afar to me, and drank it all in one gulp. I stammered as I recited the vows. "In this life, I will be loyal to you, regardless of separation in life or death. Regardless of..." I couldn't go on. Those words should have been for him. The groom gently wiped away the tears on my face and kissed me on the forehead. In the corner of my eye. In that corner, there was no one there anymore. When I met Jorge, I was still in college. My cell phone was stolen at the subway exit. I chased after it in high heels all the way. I successfully sprained both of my feet. Seeing that I couldn't catch up and my feet were still extremely painful, I couldn't help it. I leaned against a tree and cried. Someone behind me rushed out past my shoulder. A tall and thin figure, wearing a black hoodie, ran like a swift cheetah. Someone else cheerfully helped me up. "Don't cry. The one who just left is our monitor. With him around, you won't lose your cell phone." I saw his school badge and name. He is from the police academy next door. His name is Austin. In less than a minute, the boy in the black hoodie returned, bringing the thief back with him along with the cell phone. 39 seconds. "Jorge, did you speed up your sprint again?" Austin looked at his watch and then at the thief. "It's your bad luck. You met the number one in our department today. Still want to run?" The thief was dejected and didn't even dare to raise his head. The boy named Jorge was too lazy to speak. He walked straight over and handed the cell phone back to me. I stood up leaning against the tree and reached out to take it. "Thank you." There was another sharp pain in my ankle. I almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, he pulled me in time. His arm was very strong. I fell into his arms. I could smell the very faint fragrance of laundry detergent on his clothes. It seemed that my chin had also hit his collarbone. Jorge quickly let go of his hand and took a step back, putting distance between us. Austin saw it and said, "Oh, is this a sprained ankle? Jorge, don't you have to carry her to the police station?" Jorge stared at him with a cold look. Austin smiled mischievously and looked at me. "You don't know, right? Today he accompanied me to the temple. That master insisted on giving him a fortune stick." I was puzzled. Jorge obviously wanted to stop him, but Austin had already finished speaking in one breath. "The master said that his destined one is not in the past, not in the future, but right now. As soon as he came out, he met you. Isn't it a coincidence?" Jorge gave him a warning look and motioned for him to shut up. I clutched the cell phone, feeling inexplicably blushing. The thief was probably also stunned and actually asked, "Then are we still going to the police station? I've already returned the cell phone to you." Austin immediately locked his throat and dragged him forward, leaving a sentence. "Jorge, the girl is in your care. Remember, she sprained both of her feet." I was extremely embarrassed and said, "It's okay. I can walk by myself." As soon as I took a step, I grimaced in pain. "Don't force yourself," I heard him say. Then my knee bent and I was picked up by him. My arm instinctively hugged his neck and then quickly let go. The street lamp was bright. The lines of his profile were like a smooth stroke of ink, flowing into the invisible place at the neckline of his hoodie. I quietly reached out and gently grabbed his sleeve. Jorge didn't react at all, as if he hadn't noticed. After finishing the transcript and returning to school, Riker was already waiting for me at the school gate and kept thanking him. Jorge nodded and turned to leave. I don't know where I got the courage and shouted, "Can you give me your contact information?" His footsteps paused, but he didn't stop. He waved at me with his back to me. On the empty street, the street lamp stretched his figure very long. I suddenly thought of that sentence. I walk alone in the mountains. No need to see me off. The school arranged a friendship activity with the police academy. I put in the same effort as for the final exam and wrote my personal introduction so upright and exaggerated that I was successfully selected. I quickly scanned the opposite side. Unfortunately, there was no Jorge. I became listless. Several boys invited me to dance, but I refused. In the middle of the dance floor, many people were dancing, while I was in a daze. I heard someone at the door shout, "Jorge? I thought you weren't coming." I stood up suddenly and saw Jorge talking to someone. "There is still time after training. Come and sign in." The person opposite him was exactly Austin. Hearing this, the latter smiled. "You kid. Oldly asked you to come and support the occasion. You're just going through the motions." Jorge was too lazy to speak. After signing, he was about to leave. I quickly called out to him, "Jorge." He turned around in surprise, his dark eyes looking at me. I summoned up my courage and said, "Can I ask you to dance?" Austin had already started yelling, "Isn't this Jorge's destined one?" Jorge hesitantly called out my name, "Leah?" I hurriedly nodded. I haven't danced today. Can I?" He was silent for a moment and said, "I don't know how to dance." My heart sank. I said dryly, Okay. I forced a smile at him. Jorge pursed his lips and suddenly said, "But if you'd like, I can invite you for coffee." Holding the hot latte, I felt like I was dreaming. Jorge didn't talk much anyway. Today he seemed especially quiet and didn't say much. The dance at the communication hall was coming to an end. People came out sporadically. The school bus was parked next to it. The driver got off to smoke. Jorge asked, "How are you going back?" I was a little disappointed. "Arrangements have been made to leave together. There will be a roll call." He hummed, looked at his watch and said, "I'll leave first." For some reason, I had a feeling that once he left, he wouldn't look back. My voice was faster than my brain. I called out to him, "Jorge." He turned around. His eyebrows were slightly raised, waiting for me to speak. I almost wrung my skirt to pieces. I held back my excuse. "I must find a boyfriend. Can you help me?" There was a moment of silence. Jorge finally said, "Maybe I'm being self-indulgent, but I think I need to tell you that if there is an accident, I will never fall in love, get married or have children in my life." I was stunned on the spot. I don't know how long it took. The driver finished smoking and shouted, "You can get on the bus now." I woke up like a dream and stammered, Okay. Thank you for the coffee. Goodbye." He also looked down at me and replied, "Goodbye." I was lovelorn, although it was an unrequited love. Riker dragged me to drink and said she would introduce handsome guys to me. A few of them went to disco. I sat in place and was in a daze. Unconsciously, I thought of Jorge again. He said that he would never fall in love in his life. So unknowingly, a whole glass of Long Isle and iced tea went down. Who said that alcohol can relieve sorrow? Clearly, sorrow is even greater. Finally, it was about to end. Riker took me back by a shortcut. I leaned close to her ear and babbled nonsense. On the way, I squatted by the trash can. I looked back and then rushed up like crazy and knocked away the man who was holding Riker. "You son of a bitch. Let her go." I didn't push him away. Instead, he pushed me to the ground. The fur coat spread out, revealing the suspenders inside. He let go of Riker and walked towards me. He grabbed my arm, pulled me up, and roughly pulled off the fur coat with his other hand. "You're quite loyal, little girl. Then you can take her place." I slapped him across the face. The man was hurt by the slap and grabbed my neck. Riker rushed over and pulled his hand, shouting, "Help!" At this moment, outside the bar were people leaving. It was very noisy. No one could hear the movement in this alley. I seemed to be suffocating. There were stars in my vision, one overlapping another. The man was suddenly pulled away, and then someone punched heavily. The punches were fast and fierce. In just a few seconds, the man was knocked to the ground and didn't get up for a long time. I slid down against the wall, covering my throat and coughing nonstop. Whose embrace did I fall into? It was really warm. Jorge's face was in front of me, frowning. How are you? Alcohol is really a good thing. It can actually let me see Jorge. I still have to drink it in the future. If I can't see him in reality, it's good to see him in hallucinations. Seeing me silent. He stretched out 5 fingers and waved them in front of my eyes. Are you still conscious? I grabbed his wrist. In the dim light of the alley, I saw him raise his eyebrows and his eyes were questioning. I said, Riker, did you actually give me a hallucinogen? The person in the hallucination will even hand me a tissue. Isn't it funny? Riker stood up leaning against the wall, panting and scolding me. Are you stupid? That's really Jorge. For I reached out and pinched Jorge's face. It was warm. He looked at me calmly. His eyes were dark. Suddenly I burst into tears and reached out and hugged him tightly. I was about to forget you. Why did I meet you again? Jorge. I hate you. He froze. A familiar figure popped out from behind him. Hey. Isn't this Jorge's destined one? Oh, we are really destined. We just finished training. I was wondering. As he was walking, he suddenly turned a corner. So he came to be a hero and save the beauty. It was Austin. He was still chattering. Jorge. Your ears are really sharp. You said you heard someone crying. There really is. Is this the telepathy between destined ones? Jorge said patiently. If you have time to talk, it's better to help her find her coat. Austin slapped his head and really went to look for it. He said, it fell into the dirty ditch. It can't be worn. Another cold wind blew. I couldn't help shivering and subconsciously shrank into his arms. Austin asked again, what should we do? Jorge didn't say a word. He directly started taking off his coat. Then, he wrapped me in that down jacket. His body temperature. His body temperature. I was wrapped tightly, only showing 2 eyes to look at him. He asked me, can you walk? The dim light fell on his eyes. I actually felt that he was much more patient than usual. I felt like crying a little. My leg hurts so much. There are ants biting me. Can you pick me up? Riker finally came to her senses and put her hands on her hips. You really have no IQ when you drink too much. Ants rarely bite you. You just got numb legs from squatting for too long. I couldn't understand what she said. I only knew to wipe my tears with Jorge's coat. The tears scalded my face. And then the place where I was it started to ache faintly. The person in front of me was silent for a moment and said nothing. He picked me up horizontally, passing through the dim alley and through the noisy bar. His arms were so strong, but the whole person was quiet and aloof. Looking at him without blinking, he turned his face away. The arc of his eyelashes falling was like the wings of a butterfly, long and curled. My stomach started to churn again. I covered my mouth. Jorge noticed. Want to vomit? His voice was very soft and actually sounded a little gentle. I wiped the tears that welled up instantly. I don't want to now. He raised his eyes. You're crying again? I feel so bad. So bad. He looked down at the red mark on my face from being hit. His eyes darkened. Going to the hospital for treatment will get better soon. I shook my head. No. I feel bad in my heart. Jorge looked at me inquiringly. The night and the alcohol were at work. I actually read a little warmth from his eyes. The soreness in my chest became more and more intense. I grabbed the collar of his sweater and couldn't help crying loudly. Jorge. I just learned to like someone. And you said you will never fall in love in your life. But life is so long. Can you give me a chance? Can you? Can you? I looked at him pleadingly. However, there was no extra expression on his face. He didn't even look at me anymore. His gaze fell on the occasional speeding vehicles on the street. The evening wind was so cold. There were no stars. I slowly let go of his clothes. Riker was right. I was drunk today. I'm sorry. When I woke up, I was already lying on my bed in the dormitory. The sky was bright. I looked at my phone. It was already 11 o'clock. I opened my mouth and only then did I realize my voice was hoarse. Riker? Are you there? Riker opened the curtain, poured me a glass of honey water, and handed it to me. Drink it quickly and replenish some water. My head hurts so much. It hurts like it's going to split. My face and arms also hurt. The sunlight outside the window shone in. I saw that my arms were bruised. I hesitated. Did I drink too much of your wine yesterday and you beat me up? Riker put her hands on her hips and said angrily, "What being beaten by me? We were beaten by a pervert. Okay?" She climbed onto my bed and shook my shoulder vigorously. "Missy, don't tell me you've forgotten everything that happened last night." I got dizzy from being shaken by her. So I simply lay down again and stared at the ceiling in a daze. "You said last night, pervert?" Fragmented memories came flooding in. For a while, it was the perverted man reaching out and pulling my coat. For a while, it was me crying in Jorge's arms. I covered my face with both hands. I must be dreaming. Riker didn't intend to let me go. She took my hand away and told me in an orderly manner. "Yesterday." She said that yesterday Austin was summoned away by his girlfriend. So Jorge took a taxi and sent us to the hospital. Along the way, I was crying softly. The driver noticed me and kept observing us from the rearview mirror. Jorge had to show the driver his campus card to prove that he was not a bad person. When the doctor was applying medicine to my knees and arms, I grabbed Jorge and cried. I kept crying until I was gasping. In the end, Jorge took the cotton swab and carefully disinfected my damaged wounds bit by bit. The doctor found it funny and said to Jorge, "Your little girlfriend is quite delicate." Before Jorge could speak, I burst into tears again and said that I was not qualified to be his girlfriend. When he sent us back to school, it was almost 4 o'clock in the morning. It is said that I grabbed Jorge's sleeve and refused to let go no matter what. "I know that if you leave, you won't come back. I know that if you leave, we will have nothing to do with each other at all. I know." Jorge remained silent all the time. He looked down at me and let me pull him. I looked at him and then wiped my tears. Finally, I suddenly let go, choking with sobs, but also very resolute. "You go. It doesn't matter if you don't fall in love. I can fall in love alone. It doesn't matter. Really, it doesn't matter." The guard couldn't help but come out to patrol. Riker felt embarrassed and pulled me inside. And I was still talking nonsense. Looking back every 3 steps. Crying loudly. Jorge didn't say a word all along. He just watched us until we were completely out of sight. Riker was still vividly imitating. "Is it wrong to like someone? Riker, why did you tell me to shut up? Woo woo woo." I covered my face with a pillow towel and tried to strangle myself. "I'm too ashamed to live." "Really?" Riker uncovered my pillow towel and handed my phone to me. "You were sending messages all night yesterday. You take a look. Don't tell me you were fanatically confessing to the teachers." I was shocked and sat up holding my phone. But I saw that my WeChat was empty. There was only an unread message from a strange avatar. He said, "Yes." What the hell? I clicked on the chat dialog box and scrolled up to the top. There were some rambling words in front. "For a while." I shouted pain. "For a while." I said I was scared. The person on the other side was also very patient and cooperated. Although the replies were all very short, one could tell that he didn't leave. Scroll down further and start being unreasonable. "Do you believe in fate? Life is too long. Seize the day. Let's roll the dice." 13. I win. 46. You win. I only want the present, not a lifetime. Is it okay? There was no reply from the other side. After almost 20 minutes, there was a new message. His answer was that he rolled a dice. 4 points. He won. The 2 people should have no more intersections. But I sent a happy emoji and was convinced. It's 3. I won. He didn't speak all the time. At 8 o'clock in the morning today, when I was still sleeping, he replied. He said, yes. Yes. You won. Yes. Perhaps we can try to move towards the present together. I am a drunk who cheats and has blurry eyes. And he actually tacitly consented. I felt my eyes sour. Riker was already so excited that she almost screamed. Gee Leia. You are really capable. Were you really drunk? How come you are better at this than when you are awake? I shook my head. I felt my heart sour and swollen. I couldn't say anything. When I climbed out of bed to wash up, I caught a glimpse of the black down jacket hanging on the back of the chair. Some memories of last night came back. How I shivered with cold in Jorge's arms. How he took off his down jacket and wrapped me up. I grabbed his collar and cried. And he really looked down at me. His eyes were dark. Like obsidian. Don't think about it anymore. It's best to avoid him for a few days. Over there. Riker answered the phone. Hello. Police? Oh, okay. We will probably go there in about half an hour. She slipped behind me and looked at me in the mirror. I forgot to tell you. Yesterday Jorge asked us if we needed to call the police. I thought, how could we let that scumbag run away? We must call the police. The facial cleanser smeared my eyelids. I hurriedly rinsed it off. I heard Riker passionately declare, so, get ready. Let's go to the police station. Deal with the scumbag and meet your lover by the way. Very suddenly, water choked into my throat. I coughed so hard that I couldn't catch my breath. At first, it was just choking on water. Later, it was like a cough caused by a cold. Riker poured me water and opened the medicine box and handed me the capsule. The cold medicine Jorge prepared for you. The doctor said you don't have a fever and won't prescribe it for you. He said you will sooner or later. I have to say, he predicted it. Right? I held the small capsule and was distracted for a moment. In the police station, Jorge had already arrived. Just from a back view, one could still see his handsomeness. I wore a hat and a mask. I followed behind Riker the whole time and tried to make myself invisible. Fortunately, Jorge didn't say anything to me either. He just communicated with the police and told the whole story of what happened yesterday. I silently looked at his back. I felt a little indescribable discomfort in my heart, so I made an excuse to get some water and walked out. The water gurgled. I was holding a paper cup and was a little distracted. A hand stretched out beside me and turned off the faucet for me. It's overflowing. A familiar voice. I looked up in a panic and met Jorge's eyes. You've been avoiding me today. Why? He paused for a few seconds, as if organizing his words. Didn't you say seize the day? My hand trembled and the hot water was about to spill. Fortunately, Jorge reacted quickly and caught it steadily. He paused and said, I've heard that people tell the truth after drinking. I've also heard that people talk nonsense after drinking. I don't know which one you were yesterday. Those words from yesterday. I was so embarrassed that my ears turned red. I didn't dare to look up at him. Jorge observed my expression and thought he got the answer. He smiled, understood. I will take yesterday's words as a joke. I suddenly looked up and blurted out, that's not a joke. He paused. I felt my face burning. My voice was trembling, but I stubbornly wanted to finish what I had to say. That's not a joke. That's what's in my heart. I just don't dare to say it usually. Jorge looked at me. He was still very calm, looking patient and waiting. I suddenly felt nervous and ashamed. Last night, I shouldn't have been like that. I'm sorry. That was like a coercion. Forcing you to agree. But actually you don't have to agree. You just need to listen to yourself. Jorge interrupted me. I am 20 years old. I hesitated. Huh? He said lightly, so. I am an adult. I know exactly what I am doing. My head seemed dizzy again. My voice was floating. What do you mean? Jorge put his hands in his pockets. Rarely. He looked a little uncertain. What I mean is that maybe we can be together and give it a try. I was just thinking about how to keep you from getting hurt. The guess was confirmed. I was so excited that I wanted to jump up. I hugged his arm regardless. I won't get hurt. Absolutely not. He smiled, looking at me jumping and skipping. He reached out and smoothed my messy hair. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. I am in love with Jorge. Just thinking about this makes me start giggling. Riker was annoyed by my nagging. She pressed me on the chair and gave me cosmetics one by one. You put on. Although it's called a date, it's not entirely so. We are just studying on our own. When he studies, he is always very serious. As for me, I'm absent-minded. While writing, I put down my pen and exercise book, leaned on the table, and secretly looked at him. Such a handsome guy. Such a handsome guy who is intelligent, upright, kind, and brave. He is my boyfriend. Most of the time, he pretends not to see and continues with his own things. Occasionally, he will reach out, cover my eyes, and then with a little force, turn my head back. At such times, I would take the opportunity to hold his hand. He glanced at me. I smiled and mouthed, I'm warming your hand. He didn't speak and didn't pull his hand back. Instead, he spread his fingers and completely wrapped mine. There was a comforting temperature that spread from my fingertips all the way to my heart. His hand was always warmer than mine. Riker thinks that I like Jorge a little more. She taught me, in a relationship, he must like you more than you like him. Only then will you be happy. Do you know? I hesitated, but even if I like him more, I am also very happy. Super happy. Riker lay on the bed and wailed, there's no saving you. I couldn't help smiling. Jorge's love is reserved, not as flamboyant as mine. He doesn't make decisions easily. But once he decides to do something, he will do it well with his heart. As good as his word. He is that kind of person. Those sweetness that he doesn't show easily. I just want to hide them one by one. I'll look at them myself. No one else should know. Hide a beauty in a golden house. I hide Jorge. During a rare holiday, he invited me to go out and play. Taking a plane, then a high-speed train, and then a bus. We arrived in the south from the north. The vehicle passed through the fields. Large tracts of unfamiliar plants. Jorge said, this is tobacco. I have lived in the north since I was a child. I was a little curious along the way. He gave me the window seat. I looked at the scenery and he looked at me. The bus to our destination was in the evening. I fell asleep on his shoulder. When I woke up, through the window, the mountains outside the window flashed by. Only the bright moon remained. I quietly made a wish to the moon. May we all live a long life and share the beauty of the moon though we are miles apart. Then I looked at Jorge. He was also asleep, but he didn't sleep soundly. I don't know what he dreamed about. There was a slight frown. I quietly reached out to smooth his brow. Such a good-looking face. I really can't bear to see him frown. Not even a little bit of discomfort. The bus stopped at the toll station and Jorge opened his eyes. I was caught off guard. I remained in the posture of looking down at him, and was caught by his gaze. He blinked slowly, with a bit of drowsiness just after waking up. I was a little embarrassed to be caught. I smiled sheepishly and was about to lie back down. He held my head and kissed me. Very light. A touch and then parted. Someone in the back seat turned on the seat light and reached for something on the storage rack. Jorge quickly let go of me. My face was burning like fire. I covered my face with the hat of my coat and zipped it up to the top, only showing 2 eyes. He put his hands on my cheeks and turned me to look at him. So easily shy. What will you do when meeting the parents? He asked. Meeting the parents? Sweat immediately oozed from my palms. I became even more nervous. Why didn't you tell me in advance? I haven't prepared at all. He seemed a little amused and asked, what do you need to prepare? I was in a dilemma. For example, how to be polite and comprehensive. How to make uncle and aunt like me. I haven't experienced it before. I need to preview in advance. Jorge looked at me and curved his lips. The smile quickly disappeared again. He said, "Not uncle and aunt." I was puzzled. Huh? He said, "My parents have passed away. The elder I want to take you to meet is an old friend of theirs. In the carriage at night." He told such a thing in such a calm tone. I looked at him without blinking. Jorge said, "Did I scare you?" I held his hand and looked at him very seriously. "If they are not here, then I must love you a little more." Jorge didn't speak anymore. Just looked at me. I pulled his palm to my cheek and used the temperature of my face to warm his skin that had just been chilled. I whispered, "If I had known earlier, I would have loved you doubly earlier." He pulled his hand back and hugged me tightly. I saw the moon outside the window again. May we all live a long life. May we all live a long life. Jorge's elder is very kind. Although he seems to be of a high rank. When he talked to us, he was as kind as my dad. Towards the end of the meal, he actually took the initiative to raise his glass to me. I was flattered. I quickly poured wine. Jorge wanted to stop me but didn't succeed. I had already drunk it all in one gulp. There was reproach in his eyes. Uncle Yuan smiled. After so many years, Xiaoshen finally has someone by his side, and can live an ordinary life. Thank you. Jorge lowered his eyes and didn't say anything. I was inexplicably a little emotional. Maybe it was because of that glass of liquor. I said, "You're welcome. If I should thank anyone, it's also me who should thank him for giving me a chance. You don't know, right?" I chased him. Jorge was rarely a little embarrassed and explained in a low voice, "She is like this when she drinks." Uncle Yuan looked at me and then at Jorge and also laughed. This meal lasted a long time. During the meal, it was Uncle Yuan who was telling interesting stories about Jorge when he was little. While listening, I pictured little Jorge in my mind. He must be just as handsome and aloof as he is now. No one knows how warm he can be in private. When it was over at night, we said goodbye to Uncle Yuan and walked back to the hotel slowly. There were pots of flowers with unknown names in the courtyard. So amazing. In the north, at this season, flowers no longer bloom outdoors. Jorge brought a chair and let me sit down and look at them slowly. I had a sudden idea and took his hand. "Don't you think you are very much like a rose?" He asked back. "Rose?" I nodded vigorously. At first glance, it's so beautiful. When you want to reach out and pick it, you will be pricked by thorns. He looked at me, a little hesitant. "I'm sorry." I hugged him tightly and rubbed my cheek against his neck. Kokioslai. "Don't say sorry. There is still the second half of the sentence. Jorge, when you are really willing to get close to someone, you will pull out all the thorns by yourself. Then there is only beauty left." Am I like a poet? Jorge didn't speak. He just hugged me a little tighter. I struggled to straighten up to get closer to his ear. I whispered, "Jorge, I love you so much. Thank you for giving me the chance to get close to you. You don't know how happy I am to be with you." When I entered the room, I found out that Jorge had booked a standard room. 2 beds, clearly separated. I glared at him. He avoided my gaze. After washing up, I lay on the bed. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became. On the other bed, Jorge's breathing was shallow. It seemed that he had already fallen asleep. How could he? How could he? Do I have no charm at all? I got out of bed and then got on the bed and climbed onto his bed. He opened his eyes. The very faint moonlight shone in. I could understand the confusion in his eyes. I lifted the quilt and got in. I said without blushing or beating heart, "Oh, I haven't had sleepwalking for a long time. It feels like today is very suitable." Jorge was silent. He turned over and got out of bed. He walked around to my original bed and lay down. I was frustrated. I sat up and took a step across to him. Through the quilt. I wrapped myself around him with all my limbs. Am I so annoying? Other people's boyfriends want to be close to their girlfriends. Why don't you? Jorge was a little restrained and looked away. Come down first. I wanted to cry. I don't want to. He coaxed and persuaded. The temperature is low. You will catch a cold. I got into the quilt and hugged his arm tightly. In his shocked expression, I smiled sweetly. This way I won't catch a cold. Jorge didn't seem to want to talk much. I comforted him again. You don't have to worry that I will do something to you. I can't beat you at all. If I break the law, you can tie me up. He exhaled gently. In the end, he still said, go to sleep. I don't know if he can sleep. Anyway, I can't sleep. Jorge's arm was pressed against my chest. I didn't dare to move. Afraid of pressing on him. And I didn't dare to let go. Afraid that he would leave quietly. Unable to sleep. I just looked at his sleeping face. His eyelashes are so long. His skin is so white. I really don't know how he grew like this. I don't know how long it took. There were a few intermittent sounds coming from next door. I suddenly realized what it was. My cheeks suddenly turned red and I shrank into the quilt. The single bed was too narrow. Inevitably, I touched his skin. I quickly retracted my feet. Afraid of making him cold. My hands and feet are always cold in winter. I didn't soak my feet tonight. Until now, my feet are still cold. After just a moment, I saw him open his eyes. Jorge pulled his hand away and turned over. So my feet were tightly pressed against his calf. So warm. And it's conceivable how cold he would feel. I hurriedly tried to break free. But I couldn't move at all. Don't move. His voice was a little hoarse. I didn't dare to look at him and buried myself in the pillow little by little. The atmosphere became strange. I was a little embarrassed and peeked at Jorge. But I saw him lying still, looking at the ceiling in a daze. It turned out that I wasn't the only one who was embarrassed. The night gradually became quiet. Suddenly, I had other thoughts. I leaned close to his ear and asked, do you know the difference between a kiss and a peck? Jorge seemed to sense something. He didn't answer. He moved to the outside and quietly distanced himself from me. How could I let him go? I reached out and put my arm around his shoulder and threatened, if you move again, I will lie on top of you. Jorge was almost driven crazy by me. He looked at me with restraint. What do you want to do? Immediately, a very inappropriate answer popped into my mind. I was shocked by my own shamelessness. I pressed my forehead against his shoulder socket and laughed nonstop. After laughing enough, I raised my head seriously. I didn't think of anything. I just wanted to ask you. Do you know the difference between a kiss and a peck? Jorge didn't speak. The wind blew outside the window. The shadows of the trees swayed. I slowly moved a little closer to him. If you don't say anything, I'll assume you don't know. I'll teach you. I lowered my head and kissed the corner of his mouth. He suddenly opened his eyes wide. Those obsidian-like eyes looked at me. My cheeks were a little red. But I had to be calm. Don't stare at me. I'm teaching you knowledge. I propped myself up on my elbow, closed my eyes, and cheered myself on. But Jorge didn't cooperate. I kissed him in a clueless way. My saliva was all over. I still didn't find what I wanted. I was so angry that I opened my eyes and glared at him. Why are you like this? Then I heard him laughing. In the next second, the world spun. My vision was completely occupied by him. Those dark eyes seemed to have a vortex that took away my sanity. I felt that I would drown in his eyes. Jorge leaned down. Not in a hurry. Slowly and patiently. It turned out that just like this could make me feel weak in the legs. He finally let me go. I was almost out of my wits. I hugged his arm and kept panting. Jorge reached out and gently stroked my hair like stroking a kitten. Then he lowered his head, kissed my forehead, and said, go to sleep. On the last day of the trip, Jorge said he was going to a place and asked me to wait for him, as if not reassured. He also told me to be especially careful if I walked around outside. I had been inseparable from him all along the way. Suddenly being separated, I was a little reluctant to part with him. I grabbed the hem of his clothes and whispered softly, "What place is it? Can you take me with you?" He turned around and didn't speak for a moment. I added, "Just stand at the door and don't disturb you. Okay? I want to be with you." Jorge pursed his lips. In the end, he said, "Okay." The bus stopped. He held my hand and walked forward. It actually stopped in front of a funeral supplies store. There were yellow and white chrysanthemums on display. Some were real and some were fake. Paper villas, paper cars, and paper clothes were all colorful. Not gloomy at all. Instead, they looked like works of art. Jorge quickly came out, carrying a bag of ghost money and incense. Without saying anything, he led me forward. I noticed that he was wearing all black today. When we got off again, it was at the entrance of the Martyrs Cemetery. The location of the cemetery was very hidden. Entering also required going through multiple procedures. Jorge completed the procedures. The guard opened the door and motioned for us to enter. I probably realized what Jorge was going to take me to do. Looking at my red leather boots, I was a little hesitant. The color was too bright. Jorge walked a few steps forward. Seeing that I didn't follow, he raised his eyebrows slightly. It was an inquiring look. I said, "Can you wait for me?" I took off my shoes. He didn't understand and frowned. "You will be cold. And there is a cobblestone road inside. You will hurt." I had already quickly taken off my leather boots and stuffed them into my school bag. I chuckled. "It's not cold. Let's go." The guard laughed first. "Little sister, the people lying inside are all martyrs. They don't care about these things." Only then did Jorge understand. His eyes were dark and unreadable. He put down the bag in his hand and came over. "If you come, they will be very happy," he said like this. Then, he unzipped my school bag, took out the boots, and held my ankle and placed it on his knee. He tied the laces of the boots again, slowly and carefully. He was very serious in everything he did. The guard stood aside with a smile and didn't say anything. But my face was completely red. Looking at his slender fingers, I suddenly became distracted, thinking of the first time we met. He also held my ankle like this and sprayed yun and biao all over. The last lace was also tied. Jorge pulled me up and gently touched the top of my head. Stepping over the cobblestones, passing by the pine and cypress trees, we came to a tombstone. It was the joint tomb of Jorge's parents, when they sacrificed themselves. It was more than 10 years ago, when Jorge was 6 years old. On the tombstone, where the names of descendants should have been written, it was empty. There was no Jorge's name on it. It could be seen that the cemetery staff had cleaned it carefully. It was very clean here. There were no dead branches and fallen leaves. Jorge took out a tissue from the bag and gently wiped the photos on the tombstone. The two people in the photos smiled very brightly. Between their eyebrows and eyes, one could vaguely see a little bit of Jorge's shadow. Jorge straightened up, lit a few sticks of incense, and gave me some. I quickly took them and bowed again and again. After bowing, I held the incense in my hand and waited for Jorge. He still maintained the posture of bowing down. He didn't move for a long time. Maybe he was talking to his parents in his heart. Unconsciously, my gaze drifted to the tombstone photo again. Jorge inserted the incense into the soil. I also followed and inserted it. The incense ash had accumulated for too long. With a little force, it fell down and landed on the back of my hand. It was hot. Jorge's reaction was even faster than mine. He held my wrist, unscrewed the bottle cap, and poured water on the back of my hand. In fact, it was only a momentary pain. It was soon over. I had made a mountain out of a molehill. I was quite embarrassed, but he seemed a little distracted. I softly called him, Jorge? What are you thinking? He smiled. I thought of when I was a child. I also burned my hand like you. My mother. Just like I am now. Quickly unscrewed the bottle cap and poured water. He was just casually talking about things from the past. But I suddenly wanted to hug him very much. If even such a small thing could be deeply remembered. Then, over the years, how many times has he chewed on the memories with his parents? Although Jorge and I are 2 years apart, our birthdays are only 1 day apart. I asked him how he would celebrate his birthday. He recalled, since I was 7 years old. I haven't celebrated my birthday anymore. I jumped up. How can that be? On the overpass. He held my waist. Helplessly. Be careful. I held his hand back and said enthusiastically, why don't we celebrate together? Put it on your birthday. Is it okay? He hesitated for a moment. In the end, he nodded and said yes. That day happened to be Saturday. I booked a daily rental house. I called Riker and Dawson and invited several of Jorge's friends. Everyone bought groceries and cooked together. It was very lively. Jorge sent me a message in advance, saying that the teacher had kept him for something. He would be late. Let us not wait for him. Riker was cooking and directing Jorge's classmates to wash the vegetables, casually asking, why did the teacher keep him and not you? Those people laughed. There is a dispute about Jorge's graduation destination. Probably the teacher is trying to persuade him to stay. I slowed down my chopping movements. What dispute? They looked at each other. Austin realized something was wrong. Didn't Jorge tell you? Riker observed my expression and said, don't be mysterious. Hurry up and tell. She jokingly raised the spatula and urged, if you don't tell, I won't cook anymore. Austin said, actually, it's not a big deal. Jorge wants to go back to Yunnan to be a policeman. A teacher thinks he can have a better future than wants to keep him in Beijing. I said, his hometown is in Yunnan. It's normal for him to want to go back. Another person hesitated and said, but Jorge wants to be a drug enforcement policeman. A sharp pain. The knife cut crooked and cut my finger. Blood immediately gushed out and dropped on the cabbage. The color contrast was obvious. Riker immediately threw away the spatula and shouted, how could you be so careless? Those classmates immediately fell silent and tactfully went out to look for the first aid kit. After a few minutes, Austin poked his head and reported, there is no first aid kit. We will go to the gate of the community to buy one. They ran away in a flash, afraid that Riker would vent her anger on them. Riker was really angry at me for being hopeless. You can cut your hand while chopping vegetables. Go sit over there. I'll cut. I was driven to the sofa. I took a tissue. Blood gushed out and quickly soaked the tissue. I took a few more and pressed down hard. The door opened. I looked in the direction of the sound. Jorge was standing at the door with a bag of medicine. He closed the door and walked in. I ran into them on the way. They went to pick up the cake. He said. I looked at him. I had a lot to say in my heart, but didn't know how to say it. Jorge walked straight over and held my hand. After seeing the blood on the tissue, he frowned and his tone was stern. How could you be so careless? I lowered my head and didn't speak. He took out the cotton and alcohol from the bag. When he was about to press it on the wound, he paused. It will hurt a little. I nodded. I'll endure it. He looked at me unexpectedly. Yes, I am always very delicate. Don't say cutting my finger. Even scraping my skin can make me whine all day. I lowered my head and avoided his gaze. The cotton was pressed on the wound. The 10 fingers are connected to the heart. I shuddered all over. Jorge took out the bandage and instructed, don't touch water. If you want to take a bath when you go back, wrap the wound with a bag or glove. I nodded. The bandage was wrapped around my finger layer by layer. He would tell Riker to help you change it. I nodded again. He probably thought I was scared. His tone was rarely gentle. It seems that there is a lot of blood flow. In fact, the wound is not very big. It will be better in a few days. Tears dropped one by one and disappeared into my dark fleece pants. Jorge finally realized that something was wrong with me. He pushed aside my bangs. A moment of silence. He asked, "Why are you crying?" I wiped my tears with the back of my hand and tried my best to calm down. "Jorge, are you going back to Yin and to be a drug enforcement policeman?" He pursed his lips and asked me first, "Is it because you knew this that you cut your hand?" Tears immediately couldn't be stopped. Jorge reached out and wiped away the tears from the corners of my eyes. Soon, warm tears welled up again and dropped on his palm. He simply hugged me, pressed my face against his chest. Tears drop by drop, wetting his shirt. I heard his breathing become a little rapid. Then he said, "I originally wanted to tell you later. That was an admission. Drug enforcement policeman. That was a drug enforcement policeman. It is a defense line. It is a monument. It is a new great wall built with flesh and blood. It is also a profession that walks between blood and fire and brushes shoulders with death at any time." I tightly circled his waist and cried until I could hardly breathe. He asked me in a low voice, "Leia, do you have anything you want to say to me?" I couldn't say a word. I suddenly thought of his parents buried in the martyrs' cemetery. There was no name of the children written on the tombstone. Does it mean some kind of protection? I also thought of not long after we met. He said that if there were no accidents, he would never fall in love or get married and have children in his lifetime. And Uncle Yuan's words. He said that Jorge had never planned to have in-depth connections with people. And he wouldn't get married either.